I read Keith Davidson's testimony in Donald Trump's New York criminal trial so that you don't have to. Keith Davidson is a lawyer. He runs a civil litigation law firm called Davidson and Associates. He was Karen McDougall and Stormy Daniels' lawyer. In 2016, Keith Davidson tells Michael Cohen that he's got a blockbuster Trump story. He's referring to Karen McDougall, the ex-Playboy model who alleges an almost year-long affair with Donald Trump. Dylan Howard, who, as you may remember, works at AMI, American Media Incorporated, which is run by David Pecker, who's good friends with his mentor, Donald Trump. Dylan Howard asked Keith Davidson if Mr. Trump cheated on Melania and ultimately ends up going to this meeting with Karen McDougall where he sort of tries to verify her story or not, at that point leaving with no deal. But Dylan Howard and Keith Davidson, they're still in contact. Keith Davidson ends up writing Dylan Howard and saying that Karen McDougall is being cornered by the estrogen mafia, which is apparently a group of women who want her to appear on ABC with the story because they'll actually tell the story. But then Keith Davidson is like, the thing about Karen is she really didn't want to tell her story. She wanted fame, she wanted money, and she didn't want to have to talk about her affair with Trump. Those are the three things that she wanted. So she goes after the deal with AMI. And I think their opening bid is something like $1 million plus $75,000 for the next 2 years in appearance fees. Like, it's a big opening offer. Eventually, a bunch of these people are on a Zoom call in, I think, August of 2016. And the number is down to like $150,000. And Keith Davidson says that he remembers Michael Cohen being like, fuck it, it's not my money. And that he thinks that implies that it's Donald Trump's money. We actually know that it ends up being AMI's money because David Pecker never gets paid back. Then on August 5th of 2016 is the effective date of the contract where AMI buys Karen McDougall's life rights. And as a part of that deal, she is not allowed to talk about anything that happened with then married men to anyone. She can't write a book about it. She can't do an interview about it. And Keith Davidson says that he understood that at the time to be Donald Trump. Like, that's the married men that he knew they were referring to. And the prosecution is like, why did they put that in the deal? And Keith Davidson is like, well, I guess there could be two reasons. Like, one, they're going to have Karen on as a media personality and they don't want to tarnish her reputation. But also David Pecker is really good friends with Donald Trump. And I kind of figured that's why this was happening. Then they also talk about what happens if Karen breaks the deal. She does talk about her affairs with then married men, Donald Trump, and she owes back $150,000 to AMI. And the prosecution sort of hammers on this point of the whole $150,000 back, I think, as if to say essentially the whole payment was to keep her quiet. We're not really considering her media services when the number is agreed upon. And now we're on to Stormy Daniels, which means we're going back to 2011, which is the first time that Keith Davidson worked with Stormy Daniels because he knows her via her talent manager, who he's also worked with previously, Gina Rodriguez. They end up working together because a site called thedirty.com, I can't tell you how many times that full URL is written in the transcripts. I think it's kind of hilarious. Anyway, thedirty.com publishes a story about all of this, the Trump Stormy Daniels of it all. And Michael Cohen calls Gina Rodriguez and is like, we're going to sue you. So Gina Rodriguez calls Keith Davidson and is like, could you call Michael Cohen for me? So then Keith Davidson calls Michael Cohen at the number that was sent to Gina Rodriguez, and it turns out to be a Trump org number. And the Trump org patches him through to Michael Cohen, who apparently picks up and just starts hitting him with a barrage of insults, is screaming at him, is yelling. And the prosecution says, what was he accusing you of? And Keith Davidson says, I don't think he was accusing us of anything. He was just screaming. Michael Cohen thinks that Stormy Daniels is the source for the story. Keith Davidson is like, no, she also wants it taken down. And Michael Cohen is like, oh, well, good luck with that then. So Keith Davidson sends a cease and desist to thedirty.com and it works. The story is taken down. So now it's late June of 2016 and Dylan Howard texts Keith Davidson and says, FYI, Gina trying to hawk Stormy. Again, Gina Rodriguez is trying to sell Stormy Daniels a fair story for money now that we're running up to the election, presuming there will be more interest in it. But actually, interest doesn't really peak until after the Access Hollywood tape is released in October of 2016. If you need a refresher, the Access Hollywood tape is where Mr. Trump said that he could just grab women by the genitals because he was famous. At this point, without Keith Davidson's involvement, Gina Rodriguez and Dylan Howard get together a deal for $120,000 for AMI to buy Stormy Daniels' life rights. But then David Pecker is like, hold on, we have not gotten paid back on the last two. This is all getting a little sketchy, and AMI backs out of the deal. So now Dylan Howard hands off the whole situation to Michael Cohen. He tells Gina Rodriguez to get in contact with Michael Cohen. She doesn't want to talk to Michael Cohen. She asks Keith Davidson to get in contact with Michael Cohen. He doesn't want to talk to Michael Cohen. Nobody wants to talk to Michael Cohen. Ultimately, Kieth does agree to do it, and they get together a $130,000 deal because now he's also got to get paid. There is supposed to be money in Kieth Davidson's client trust account on October 14th of 2016. October 17th rolls around, there's no money in the account. So then Kieth Davidson sends another email and he's like, my client, Stormy Daniels, now considers this deal void and I myself am divesting from the case. And the prosecutor is like, why did you do that? And he's like, well, one, because I was no longer interested in working on the case. And mostly, number two, because I did not want to continue to receive annoying phone calls and emails from Michael Cohen. He created all this drama. When asked if it was clear that Michael Cohen was speaking on Donald Trump's behalf, Kieth Davidson says that Michael Cohen took every opportunity to make it clear that he was working for Donald Trump. Anyway, in this time period, after October 17th, 2016, Kieth Davidson says that he gets the impression that Michael Cohen, and by extension Donald Trump, are trying to kick the can down the line, like after the election. Dylan Howard is behaving like the go-between. He's talking to Michael Cohen and he's like, it's going to be really embarrassing if you don't pay this. Ultimately, Kieth Davidson says that Michael Cohen said he would just do it himself, and he sends him the $130,000 in question at the end of October. Then it's election night, 2016, and at 3 a.m. Eastern, Kieth Davidson sends an infamous, now at least in my head, text to Dylan Howard that says, "What have we done?" Dylan Howard responds, "Oh my God." And then the prosecution is like, did you keep talking to Michael Cohen after the election? Kieth Davidson is like, yeah. He was super depressed, and he describes this early December phone call where he's in like an Alice in Wonderland themed toy store on the phone with Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen is like, can you fucking believe I'm not going to Washington? That guy isn't even going to pay me back the $130,000. And then the prosecution is like, who is that guy? And Kieth Davidson is like, well, I thought it was Donald Trump. I think it was Donald Trump. He was referring to Donald Trump. Now we get to 2018. Stormy Daniels is going on talk shows. All the men involved in this deal are upset. Michael Cohen tells Kieth Davidson that he needs to write like a strongly worded declaration of like that they didn't have an affair. Throughout the process of the talk shows and the media statements, Kieth Davidson ends up writing 2 of those. He does this like very lawyery language thing where he's like, well, in a sense, like, what is an affair? Then the prosecution asks Kieth Davidson if he has any stake in the trial's outcome, and he says no, he does not. Okay, and now we're at cross-examination. We're almost there, you guys, I swear. They start out by being like, you don't know Donald Trump, right? And Kieth Davidson is like, no, I don't know Donald Trump. And he's like, you don't see all the business records of the Trump organization, right? And Kieth Davidson is like, not really, no. And then the defense wants to talk about that 2016 Alice in Wonderland themed toy store phone call that Kieth Davidson had with Michael Cohen. And they're like, what was your impression of Michael Cohen on that phone call? And Kieth Davidson is like, I thought he was going to kill himself. And the defense is like, why? Is it because he didn't get to be Secretary of State or Attorney General? And Kieth Davidson is like, yeah, I thought he was pretty upset about that. And then the defense is like, you said Michael Cohen is an aggressive guy. And Kieth Davidson is like, yeah. And the defense is like, you can be an aggressive guy too sometimes. For example, were you investigated for extorting Hulk Hogan? Kieth Davidson is like, yeah, I was investigated for extorting Hulk Hogan. And then the defense has like a whole extortion related line of questioning, essentially saying that Kieth Davidson often extorts money from celebrities on behalf of people who have secrets or sex tapes or whatever about them. So we've got like Hulk Hogan, Lindsay Lohan, Charlie Sheen, Tila Tequila. And Kieth Davidson essentially says, I don't remember, I don't recall, and like, I can't discuss that. It's attorney-client privilege 1 million times. At one point in this whole back and forth, the defense accuses Michael Cohen of extracting money from Charlie Sheen. They have more of a spat, and the defense is like, stop trying to play legal games with me. Like, we're both lawyers here, but stop playing games. Kieth Davidson is like, if you're not here to play legal games, then don't say the word extract. We are reminded in this conversation that Kieth Davidson's fee for working on Carrie McDougall's contract with AMI is 45% of her negotiated rate, which is it's high. Overall, the message that the prosecution wants you to take from all of this is that Michael Cohen was negotiating on behalf of Donald Trump and the Trump campaign when he made all of these deals that Kieth Davidson is describing with Karen McDougall and Stormy Daniels. And the defense wants you to think that both Kieth Davidson and Michael Cohen are pretty sketchy guys. What do you guys think? I know I'm behind, but I'm going to keep plugging away at these as long as you guys aren't quite yet at the point where you're hearing ringing in your head while you listen to them.